The night was thick with silence, save for the rasp of cicadas and the occasional groan of the old barn door that never quite shut. Sheriff Jonah Marks thought he'd buried his demons years ago, deep enough that even the earth had forgotten. But dogs, he knew, had longer memories than men. Boone, the retired K9 at his side, wouldn't quit pacing the yard. Ears pricked, nose twitching, claws raking the dirt like something was whispering beneath it. And when Boone struck Pater at midnight, Jonah realized the past doesn't stay buried forever. It claws its way back. The moon hung low over Ashford Hollow, that forgotten speck of a town clinging to the edge of the Appalachians, where shadows always seemed thicker than the daylight that tried to burn them away. Sheriff Jonah Marks stood on his porch, the boards creaking beneath his boots, cigarette ember glowing against the dark. Boone, his old K9 partner, circled the yard with a restless urgency Jonah hadn't seen in years. The dog had slowed since retirement, his muzzle frosted with gray. But tonight, he was all nerves and instinct. Jonah muttered, half to himself, half to the dog, "Easy, boy. Ain't nothing out there but dirt and ghosts." But Boone didn't stop. He scraped his paws against the ground near the fence post, sending up sprays of earth. His growl was low, vibrating through the night air, unsettling in a way Jonah couldn't ignore. Jonah exhaled smoke, rubbed his jaw, and muttered, "Christ Almighty!" The sound of gravel crunching under tires broke the stillness. Headlights carved through the trees before settling on his yard. A truck door slammed. Out stepped Eli Crawford, the deputy. Sharp, young, and still full of the belief that law had teeth. "You seen the time, Sheriff?" Eli called, pushing his hat back. "Whole county's asleep." Jonah flicked his cigarette into the dirt. "Not all of it." Eli's gaze followed Boone's frantic digging. "What's he on about?" Jonah didn't answer. Couldn't, because Boone wasn't just digging. He was clawing at the earth like he knew where to strike. Like memory guided him, not chance. The uneasy ground. Jonah crouched, his knee popping as he pressed his palm against the dirt. The soil felt damp, softer than the rest of the yard. Boone's claws had already cut deep grooves. Jonah's gut twisted. He forced a chuckle, one he didn't believe. Old boy's just dreaming of his working days. Eli squatted beside him, brushing dirt from his fingers. Soil's been turned over recently. Jonah stiffened. Lot of rain last week. Eli glanced at him. Sharp look. Measuring. Jonah hated that look. "You're going to let him keep going?" Eli asked. Jonah opened his mouth to reply, but Boone gave a guttural bark and tore harder at the ground. Dirt sprayed against Jonah's boots. And then Boone froze. His paws pressed against something solid. His hackles rose. He whined, low and urgent. Eli leaned closer, brushing aside soil until the edge of something pale emerged under the moonlight. Bone. The first layer. Eli's breath hitched. "Jesus, Sheriff." Jonah's chest went tight. He swallowed hard, but his throat felt raw. Boone backed up, tail stiff, growl lodged deep in his throat. Jonah's voice was steady when it shouldn't have been. "Animal bones. Deer, most likely." Eli scraped away more dirt, his flashlight beam cutting into the ground. The pale outline grew clearer. Not deer. Not any animal. A jaw, teeth still intact. Human. Eli shot Jonah a look one Jonah knew too well. A look that said this wasn't just discovery. It was accusation. Jonah stood slowly, fists clenched, covered back up. "What?" Eli rose, incredulous. "Sheriff, that's a body." I said covered up. Jonah's voice carried weight, the kind that comes from years of command. Eli shook his head. "That ain't how this works. We need to call it in." Jonah stepped closer, looming. "And what do you think happens when Ashford Hollow finds out there's bones buried in the sheriff's yard?" The silence that followed was colder than the night air. Eli's jaw tightened. "You knew." Jonah's eyes didn't waver. "Cover it. A town of secrets." By morning, the yard looked untouched. The soil smoothed over. Boone locked inside, pacing and growling against the door. Eli hadn't said a word after Jonah's order. He drove off before dawn, his truck's taillights disappearing into the mist. Jonah knew what silence meant. Silence was a fuse. Inside, Jonah poured whiskey into his coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the house too quiet. His late wife's chair sat empty across from him, the cushion still indented from years of her weight. He stared at it until his eyes blurred. The phone rang. He let it ring twice before answering. Sheriff Marks. The voice was female, cautious. Who's the skin? This is Mara Ellison, from down by Ridge Road. Jonah knew her widow ran the feed store. Kind woman, but life had carved lines into her face before their time. What can I do for you, Mara? There was a pause. Then, my boy, Travis, he said he saw your dog digging last night. He don't lie, Sheriff. He says it weren't no animal bones. Jonah's grip tightened around the receiver. You tell your boy to stay out of grown folks' business, Jonah said, voice low. Silence on the line. Then a click. Jonah set the phone down, heart hammering. Boone's bark erupted from the back room, sharp and urgent, as if echoing the truth Mara's boy had spoken. Fractures. By midday, whispers had already begun in town. Jonah could feel them on his skin when he walked into the diner. Conversations faltered when he entered. Eyes followed him. Eli sat at the counter, coffee untouched, hat low over his eyes. Jonah slid onto the stool beside him. We got a problem. You mean you got a problem? Eli muttered. Jonah's jaw ticked. You gonna make this official? Eli turned, finally meeting his gaze. Depends. You telling me the truth about what's in that yard? Jonah didn't answer right away. The hum of the diner's old refrigerator filled the silence. He leaned in close. Truth don't keep this town together. Silence does. Eli's face hardened. Silence ain't justice. Jonah straightened. Justice ain't what you think it is, kid. Before Eli could respond, the door to the diner creaked open. Mara Ellison stepped in, her son Travis clinging to her hand. The boy's eyes were wide, too sharp for his age, and they were locked on Jonah. Midnight again. That night, Boone wouldn't stop. Even locked inside, he clawed at the door, barked until his throat went raw. Midnight came, and Jonah, worn down, finally let him out. The dog shot straight to the fence post, nose pressed to the soil that had been smoothed over. He whined, pawing, circling. Jonah stood in the dark, shotgun in hand, breath fogging in the cold. His face was lined with something deeper than age, regret, anger, maybe both. Stop it, Boone, he whispered. Ain't nothing there. But Boone dropped his nose, pawed once, twice, then froze. His ears perked. He dug again, harder, more frantic, until the soil gave way. Jonah stepped forward, dread clawing his gut. What the dog unearthed wasn't bone this time. It was fabric, faded blue cloth, frayed at the edges, clinging to what remained beneath. And Jonah recognized it instantly. A child's shirt. The shirt was small, too small. Boone's claws had torn from the earth in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if he knew the weight it carried. Jonah stared at the faded fabric, heart hammering so hard it felt like his ribs might split. God damn it! His voice cracked low, broken. Boone sat back, whining, his eyes locked on Jonah like he was demanding something. An answer, a confession. Jonah crouched, hands trembling as he brushed away more soil. The cloth came free with a faint tear. Beneath it, the earth gave up what it guarded. A skeletal arm, tiny bones twisted at an unnatural angle. A child's bones. Jonah reeled back, stumbling onto the cold ground. He had buried men before. He had buried secrets. But this was different. And the past came rushing back with a clarity that felt like drowning. 13 years ago, summer in Ashford Hollow was brutal. The heat clung to skin, heavy with humidity and the stink of manure from farms. Jonah had been a younger man then, not yet sheriff but already wearing the uniform. He'd been called to the woods near Ridge Road, a missing child, a boy no older than 8, Travis Ellison's cousin. Jonah remembered Mara's sister screaming herself hoarse as neighbors combed the forest. He remembered finding the boy's cap snagged on a thorn bush, the brim torn, the ground around it trampled. But they never found the child. The case went cold, whispers swallowing facts until all that remained was rumor, that some drifter had taken him, that the hills themselves had swallowed him. Jonah had carried that failure like a scar. And now, the child's bones were in his yard. Present night. Boone barked again, sharp, pulling Jonah back to present. Quiet. Jonah snapped, though his voice was hoarse. His hand shook as he shoved dirt back over Bones, covering the shirt, pressing it down until the earth looked whole again. He couldn't breathe. His chest felt like a vice. The sound of tires on gravel made him freeze. Headlights cut across the yard, sweeping over the barn and catching Boone's eyes in an eerie glow. Eli Crawford's truck. Jonah cursed under his breath. The deputy stepped out, his face hard, jaw shadowed. He carried no smile, no ease, only suspicion. Couldn't sleep, Eli said. Figured I'd check on you. Dog's been barking, loud enough to wake half the county. Jonah forced himself to stand, brushing dirt from his hands. Old dog's losing his mind. Eli's gaze flicked to the ground near Boone, to the spot Jonah had just covered. Boone growled low, as if confirming what the earth hid. Eli took a step closer. You gonna tell me what's really buried there, Sheriff? Jonah's voice turned cold. You should head home, Eli. Nothing good comes from questions you ain't ready to answer. But Eli didn't move. His eyes narrowed, his hand resting near his holster. Not as a threat, not yet, but as a silent reminder. You were on duty when that kid went missing. Eli said quietly, I checked the files. You closed that case faster than most folks thought was right. Now there's bones in your yard. You expect me to believe that a coincidence. Jonah's jaw clenched. I expect you to believe what I tell you, he said. Splintering trust. The tension between them stretched, taut and dangerous. Boone whined, pacing, caught in the weight of what neither man said aloud. Finally, Eli shook his head. I can't keep this quiet, Sheriff. You know that. Jonah stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you open your mouth, Ashford Hollow falls apart. You think this town can handle knowing a child's been under their noses for over a decade? You think Mara Ellison's heart can take learning her sister's boy was buried here all this time? Eli flinched, but he didn't look away. Truth matters more than silence, Eli said. Jonah's lips twisted into something bitter. Truth don't bring back the dead. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Eli turned back toward his truck. Tomorrow, he said, I'm calling the state police. One way or another, this is coming out. He climbed in, engine rumbling to life, headlights sweeping across Jonah's face. Jonah stood rigid, Boone barking behind him as the truck pulled away. The fuse was burning faster now. Mara, morning came pale and gray. Jonah hadn't slept. He sat at his table, Boone's head resting heavy on his boots, the dogs breathing slow and steady as if exhaustion had finally won. A knock rattled the door. Jonah tensed, reaching for a revolver he kept in the drawer. He opened the door to find Mara Ellison standing there, shawl pulled tight, eyes red-rimmed. Sheriff, she said softly. Jonah forced his voice steady. Mara, what brings you by? She hesitated, then held out something wrapped in cloth. Travis found this by your fence. Said it came up when the dog dug last night. Jonah unwrapped it. A button. Faded plastic blue. Child size. His stomach dropped. Mara's eyes searched his face. That boy went missing 13 years ago. My sister never forgave herself. She drank herself to death thinking she hadn't protected him. You wouldn't lie to me, would you, Jonah? The weight of her gaze was heavier than any badge. Jonah swallowed, but words didn't come. Silence stretched, thick as smoke. Finally, Mara's expression hardened. Eli told me he's counting the state boys. Maybe that's best. Maybe it's time we stop pretending this town's clean. Jonah's hands tightened around the button until it cut into his skin. The barn. That night, Jonah couldn't sit still. Boone shadowed him as he paced the property, lantern in hand. His eyes kept drifting to the old barn at the edge of the yard, the one with the crooked door that never shut right. Memories clawed at him, nights of whiskey and regret. The barn's loft thick with secrets. He opened the door. The hinges screamed, echoing through the hollow. Dust floated in the beam of his lantern. Boone padded inside, nose twitching, tail stiff. Jonah climbed the ladder to the loft, boards creaking under his weight. Up there, In the corner where hay bales once stood, the floorboards bore faint dark stains. Old, almost gone, but not forgotten. Boone sniffed, growled low, pawed at the wood. Jonah dropped to his knees, pried up the boards. Beneath, more soil, disturbed once, long ago. He dug with his hands, dirt grinding into his nails until something hard clinked. He pulled it free. A child's shoe, mud-caked, worn impossibly small. Jonah stared, breath ragged. Behind him, Boone barked, sharp, as the barn door creaked open. Eli stood there, lantern in hand, gun at his side. His face was pale, his voice tight. I knew you were hiding something. Confrontation. Jonah rose slowly, shoe clutched in his hand. Put that gun away. Eli's arm didn't waver. Tell me the truth, Sheriff. Did you kill that boy? The barn went quiet, but for Boone's growl and Jonah's harsh breathing. Jonah's voice came low, raw. I didn't kill him. Then why is he buried in your yard? Jonah's hand shook as he held out the shoe. Because someone put him there, and they wanted me to take the fall. Eli's eyes flickered with something. Doubt, maybe, or realization, but his grip stayed firm. Who? Jonah's jaw tightened. You wouldn't believe me. Try me. Jonah stepped forward, lantern light carving deep shadows on his face. The man you've been looking up to your whole damn life. Your father. Eli froze. His gun trembled. You shut your mouth. But Jonah's eyes burned with a truth too heavy to carry any longer. 13 years ago, your old man was deputy. He knew things weren't right, but he made sure the file closed. Said the boy must have wandered off. But I saw the fear in his eyes that night. He buried the truth, buried the boy, and when he died, I thought it'd die with him. Eli shook his head, voice breaking. You're lying. Jonah tossed a shoe onto the dirt floor. Then tell me why his badge number's carved inside that shoe. Go on. Look. Eli lowered his gun, trembling as he picked it up. He turned in the lantern light. There, scratched into the sole, barely visible, 47. His father's number. Eli's breath hitched. His world cracked. And Boone barked again, the sound slicing through the night like judgment. Eli staggered back, lantern trembling in his grip. His face was pale, eyes wide, as though the barn walls themselves had closed in. Boone barked again, then fell silent, ears flat, watching both men with unflinching intensity. No, Eli whispered, shaking his head. Not him. My father wouldn't. He couldn't. Jonah's voice was low, raw. You think I want to believe it? He was my partner, Eli. He taught me half of what I know. But that night, 13 years ago, I saw him near Ridge Road, covered in dirt, shaking like a man who'd seen hell. When the boy vanished, he shut it down, said the kid wandered off. And I let it go. The confession bled out of Jonah, bitter as rust. You kept that secret, Eli said, voice tight. All these years, you let this town grieve. Let Mara's sister drink herself into an early grave, because you were too damn coward to tell the truth. Jonah's face darkened. I was protecting this town. Protecting you. Protecting me? Eli spat, rage trembling at the edges of his grief. You buried a child's bones in your yard. Jonah's jaw tightened. No, I buried the evidence. Not the boy. Your father did that. The breaking point. The barn was suffocating with silence. Dust motes drifted in the lantern light. Boone shifted, restless, sensing the crack in both men. Eli's gun trembled in his hand. He was caught between fury and disbelief, his loyalty to blood colliding with the unbearable weight of evidence. You expect me to go out there and tell folks my father was a murderer? Eli asked. I expect you to do what's right, Jonah said, voice heavy. And what's right ain't easy. Never has been. Eli's hand shook harder. You had your chance to do what's right. You failed. Jonah stepped closer, eyes hollow but steady. Maybe I did. Maybe I failed that boy, Mara, this whole damn town. But now the choice ain't mine, it's yours. For a moment, Eli looked like he might pull the trigger. Boone growled, fur bristling. Jonah didn't flinch. Then Eli lowered the gun, though his shoulders sagged under the weight of betrayal. If I turn you in, I turn him in too. His name, his memory, it all burns. Jonah's voice was gravel. The dead don't need clean names, Eli. They need peace. The dig. By morning, the decision had been made, not in words, but in the hollow exhaustion of Eli's eyes. Together, they dug. The soil gave way slow, reluctant. Boone stood guard, pacing, whining, occasionally pawing at the earth as if urging them faster. When the small skeleton was finally unearthed, both men fell silent. Jonah removed his hat, pressing it against his chest. Eli knelt, staring at the fragile remains, his face wet with silent tears. He was just a kid, Eli whispered. 8 years old. My God! Jonah's throat was raw. I should have stopped your father that night. Should have spoken up. I told myself it was mercy, keeping quiet, sparing the town. But it was weakness. I buried my failure same as he buried that boy. Eli looked up, grief twisting his features. So what now? We turn him in? He's been dead 5 years. What's the point? Jonah stared at the bones, then at Boone, the dog who had clawed the truth from the earth when men wouldn't. The point, Jonah said, voice hoarse, is that this boy finally goes home. The betrayal. But silence doesn't stay buried. By afternoon, Mara stood in Jonah's yard. She had come without being called, her shawl pulled tight, eyes searching the ground. Boone barked once, then quieted, head low. What are you hiding? She asked. Jonah's lips parted, but Eli spoke first. His voice cracked, but the truth poured out. We found him, Mara. We found your sister's boy. Her face broke open with pain, knees nearly buckling. Jonah reached for her, but she recoiled. Where? She demanded. Jonah hesitated. Eli's voice filled the silence. Here, in the sheriff's yard. Mara's eyes went wide, horror overtaking grief. You knew. All this time. Jonah's chest caved inward. Mara, don't. Her voice was steel, sharper than any blade. You let me suffer. You let her die thinking she was to blame. And you. She turned to Eli, voice breaking. You knew when you stayed silent, too. Eli's shoulders slumped. I only just learned. But her eyes were on Jonah, eyes full of betrayal. So deep it hollowed him out. You're no better than the man who put him there, Mara whispered. Then she turned, walking away with the slow, shattering dignity of a woman who had carried too much pain for too long. Jonah didn't follow. Couldn't. The state boys. They came 2 days later. Black cars, crisp uniforms, clipboards, and the cold efficiency of men who didn't know Ashford Hollow and didn't care to. They exhumed the bones, cataloged the evidence, asked questions Jonah barely answered. Eli gave a statement, voice flat, eyes hollow. When they left, they took the boy's remains with them. For the first time in 13 years, the child was leaving Jonah's land. Boone sat at the edge of the yard, ears low, watching the cars fade into the trees. Jonah stood beside him, hat in hand. His voice was barely a whisper. You did right, boy. Better than any of us. The dog leaned against his leg, warm and steady. Jonah felt the tremor in his chest break loose at last. Quiet reckoning. The town turned cold. The whispers spread fast. Sheriff Marks, the cover-up, the bones in his yard. He wasn't arrested. There wasn't enough to tie him directly. But guilt doesn't need chains. Mara never spoke to him again. The diner stopped pouring him coffee. Folks he'd known all his life crossed the street to avoid him. Eli took over most duties at the station, his voice carrying a new steel Jonah hadn't heard before. Trust between them was fractured, maybe beyond repair. But the boy had been found, and that mattered more than the pieces left behind. One night, long after midnight, Jonah sat on his porch, Boone at his feet. The air was heavy with summer heat, the cicadas restless in the trees. You saved me from myself, Jonah whispered to the dog, dragged out what I tried to bury. Maybe that's the only justice we get. Boone rested his head on Jonah's boots, eyes closing with a tired sigh. Jonah stared into the darkness, the weight of silence finally lifting. Not replaced by peace, but by truth. And truth, however heavy, was something he could no longer bury. Final scene. The funeral was small. Just a pine box, a nameplate etched with a boy's forgotten name, and Mara standing at the grave with her son. Jonah stood at the edge of the crowd, hat in his hands. He didn't step forward, didn't speak. He had no right. When the service ended, Mara glanced his way. Her eyes were wet, but not soft. No forgiveness there, only finality. A door closing. Jonah nodded once, a silent apology she'd never accept. As the crowd dispersed, Boone tugged gently at his leash, leading Jonah away from the grave, back toward the dirt road and the long, quiet miles of Ashford Hollow. Jonah followed, the dog steady pull the only tether he had left. The boy was home. The truth was unearthed. And though the town would never look at him the same, Jonah carried one fragile solace. Some ghost had finally been laid to rest.